What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. At last, we are covering the Calgary Flames, a team that had so much potential and could potentially squander it if they don't make the playoffs. A lot of players on this team were supposed to be doing well, and unfortunately, they've been underperforming, they've been underwhelming, and it could make or break the Calgary Flames' chances at making the playoffs. And I'm alluding to Jonathan Huberdeau, Nazem Kadri, and Mackenzie Weegar, three huge pieces that were added during the offseason because they did lose Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. So at the deadline, they add Dryden Hunt, they add Nick Ritchie, and they add Troy Stetcher. But they didn't really make a big splash. They just added some depth forwards and some depth defense. And, they're just like, we're going to continue rolling with this team. A lot of people were saying we need a guy that's going to complement Jonathan Huberdeau's game. They didn't do that. We all thought it was going to be a guy like maybe Anthony Duclair or Brock Besser. Never happened. So we're in this situation now where they're a couple of points out of a playoff spot. They're going to be competing with Winnipeg till the end for the second wild card spot,
And
and
Nashville.
and Nashville too. Yeah, you could throw them in there too. And it's going to be a battle until game 82. And I don't know what to really think here. I love the Calgary Flames. A lot of people are not a big fan of Darryl Sutter. I always like Darryl Sutter, but with some of the comments he made this season in terms of some of his players, especially the comments he made in regards to um, Jacob Pelletier at one point, saying like, I don't know like who he is or whatever. He's just like a nobody. I didn't really like those comments because he is one of their best prospects and could potentially develop into a star. So, a lot of drama happening with the coach and the players as well. There's been a lot of things going wrong for the Calgary Flames, but can they cap it off and make the playoffs this season? Because if they don't make the playoffs, they may have to rethink their whole plan heading into the offseason, and it could cost Daryl Sutter and Brad Cheleving their jobs.
Well, Calgary is such a weird team. So, I look at Calgary, and one of the biggest concerns is the fact that they had 15 overtime or shootout losses this season, which to me means that they've played in 15 one-point games, right, and have essentially lost 15 games by 1 point. Even if you win half of those games, okay, which is about 7.5. So let's say about 7 games. Let's say they win 7 out of the 15 games that they lost in overtime or shootout. That's extra points. You're ahead of Winnipeg in the standings. You're near Seattle in the standings. We're not having this conversation about whether or not you're going to miss out on the playoffs. The problem is that Calgary this season has had a really hard time at closing out games. But not only have they had a really hard time at closing out games, they haven't played some fun hockey, which, listen, in the end, that's what Darryl Sutter is. He's just a boring coach. He plays a boring system. Yes, it works for the most part, but it's not a system that a lot of players enjoy playing in. But however, it's been successful before, so you can't really doubt it too much. However, like I said, if Calgary wins half their overtime games, even 8 or 7 of those games, that's 7 extra points. That puts them in a playoff spot right now. One of the interesting things about Calgary too is although they play a boring style, they haven't been able to, keep the puck out of the net. And, look, I look at their goals against this season. They're 15th in the league in goals against, which is middle of the pack. It's not terrible, right? And they're 18th in the league in goals forward. But the problem is that the games that they're losing and the goals that they're letting in, it begs the question as to whether or not this is a team that is going to be able to do anything if they were to make the playoffs. So what I mean by that is Jacob Markstrom hasn't been good, but neither is Dan Vladar. I know Dan Vladar has a winning record, and he's won a lot more games than he's lost, and Jacob Markstrom has 20 wins, 21 wins, 20 losses. However, Jacob Markstrom's got an 892 save percentage and a 294 goals against average with one shutout. That's not good for a guy you're paying about $6 million for. And then you've got Dan Vladar, who's got 13 wins, 6 losses, 5 overtime losses. That's a little bit of a concern. He's got a 287 goals against and 894 save percentage. He's playing better than Jacob Markstrom. And I think a lot of people have agreed with Calgary fans' takes in the sense where they're, looking at their AHL team as an example in the Calgary Wranglers, and they're seeing how well, goaltender Dustin Wolf is doing. And, Calgary fans have been asking for potentially, a change in net with Jacob Markstrom and Vladar, and, maybe to give Dustin Wolf an opportunity because he's been fantastic in the AHL. He's super young, and, he should be given a shot. And it hasn't been done by Darryl Sutter yet. The other question and the biggest concern of the season, yes, has been the goaltending situation, but it's also been the fact that their star players have not played like their star players. And obviously, if you think about it and if you look at it, Jonathan Huberdeau is the main example. 50 points this year, 14 goals, 36 assists, 72 points. This is a guy who last year with the Florida Panthers was a 90-point player, and now this year under a defensive system is struggling. 50 points is not good enough for Jonathan Huberdeau, especially for what you traded for him essentially. And they acquired Mackenzie Weegar. Weegar's had a good season in terms of the defensive side of things. Offensively, look, 27.74 games. It's not Mackenzie Weegar's better than that, but at the end of the day, his defensive game's gotten better, so you can't exactly disregard that. However, what's been disappointing is that they don't have a player on this team that's a point a game. Right, Tyler Toffoli's got 67 points in 75 games. He's been a big part of the reason why Calgary's still in the playoff run at this point. 31 goals, 36 assists. He's played with Darryl Sutter before. Not surprising there. Then you've got Lindholm, who's having a decent season with 63. And then it falls off, right? Kadri with 51, Backlund and Huberdeau with 50 each, and then Rasmus Anderson with 48. They don't have enough scoring, right? This is a team that's not putting the puck in the net as often as they should be, right? They have three guys that have hit 20 goals in Kadri, Lindholm, and Toffoli. Toffoli's the only one that hit 30, and they have a few guys that have hit 10, but it isn't good enough from Calgary's perspective. And yes, sometimes they're winning games 6-5, 5-4, stuff like that. But this is a team that needs to have better offense, and they need to play a little bit more of an offensive style, but they also need goaltending. So they're such a confusing team. And that's where I think the big concern comes in for Calgary is in terms of what they've had and in terms of the players they have and in terms of the roster they have, this team should be a lock for the playoffs. But they haven't played like it. Their goaltenders haven't played like it, and their forwards haven't played like it. Their decor is fine. I have no problems with Calgary's decor. I think that's the least of their worries. But their offense and their goaltending is what's let them down this season and arguably might be the reason they miss out on the playoffs. However, and I'm going to say one last thing before I let Chris talk because I've been talking for a little while now and I kind of feel bad not letting him talk. But I'm just going to basically say the last 7 games for Calgary. And the reason why I think there's a chance for them is because hear the schedule out. They play Vancouver twice. They play Anaheim. They play Chicago. They play Winnipeg, Nashville, and San Jose. All of these games are winnable games for Calgary, especially the games against Nashville and Winnipeg, which are the two biggest games of the season for them. But not only that, the other 5 games are against non-playoff teams. 2 against Vancouver, and then San Jose, Calgary, and Chicago, which should be winnable games. If Calgary can go 7-0 or 5-2, right, in the next 7 games, they have a chance here. So it's going to be determined on what these next 7 games are going to be for them and how they go about them. Obviously, they beat LA and they've won 3 out of their last 4, so they've played better lately. But is that going to continue, or are they going to falter against teams that they should beat? That's the real question.
So, if you look at the team in terms of offensive stats and defensive stats, you can tell this is a Darryl Sutter system.
Yeah.
Goals for 20th in the league, so they're averaging 3.13 per game. Their power play 20.4, so 21st in the league. So offensively, not looking great. But in terms of their defensive stats, their penalty kill percentage is at 82.1, ninth in the league. So, yeah, you can tell that this is more of a defensive team than an offensive team. But a lot of these players in Calgary's top 6 are offensively minded players. And unfortunately, even though Darryl Sutter is a good coach and he's probably a very strong playoff coach, he's won the Stanley Cup with the LA Kings a couple of times. So, his resume is there. It shows that he's a very good coach. But the problem is that he's holding back his star players, Nazem Kadri and Jonathan Huberdeau specifically. So If they do not make the playoffs or if they lose in the first round this year, I still believe that Darryl Sutter will be out the door because Jonathan Huberdeau signed to a long-term deal. Nazem Kadri too. Mackenzie Weegar, same thing. And he's supposed to be an offensive-minded defenseman. Look what he did with the Florida Panthers. So, at this point in time, we're talking about this season. So unfortunately, this is the situation. The only thing they could hope for is that Huberto and all these guys that are underwhelming right now or throughout this past 2023 season pick up their game come playoff time and they explode. Because I do believe that they're their worst enemy essentially, and the system is holding them back. And at this point in time, they just need to play desperate hockey, win now mode. Every game is a playoff game until the end of the season, until game 82. They have a serious chance of making the playoffs here, but they need to work collectively because the Winnipeg Jets are kind of in a slump right now, and now is the time to take advantage of that. Not only that, the Nashville Predators, like we spoke about before, you look at their team on paper, they're an AHL team. They have a lot of injuries um, currently. So Calgary are a healthy team. They're not really missing anybody significant. What, Chris Tanev or Mark Stone? Not
Michael
anybody
Stone,
that
not Mark Stone.
yeah,
Mark Stone
Michael
for
Stone,
sure.
which is Mark Stone's brother, my bad.
Yes.
So nothing significant. They're a very healthy team. This is exactly what you want coming and coming into the playoffs. The healthiest teams are the teams that normally go the furthest and also the teams that play the best, of course. But our former co host always said that defense wins championships. Here is another reason that the Calgary Flames could potentially go far in the playoffs if they make the playoffs. So I would say that they're a dark horse to win the Stanley Cup if they make the playoffs, but there's a lot of factors involved here for the Calgary Flames to actually go the distance.
I
Last year, look at the
disagree.
Calgary Flames, they were doing everything right. Goaltending was fantastic. Defense was fantastic. Offense was fantastic. They were scoring goals. They had a great penalty kill. They had a good power play. And this year, it's like everything is just forgotten from last year. Yeah, they did lose Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk, which are two massive losses because those guys were with the Calgary Flames for many years. And you're bringing in Huberdeau and Kadri and Weegar that are not familiar with the system and don't necessarily do well under a defensive system. But you're expecting these guys to help you get back into the playoffs. And even though you're losing star players, you're gaining star players in return. And star players are able to produce anywhere they go. But unfortunately, in this case, it seems like that's not the case.
One thing I want to say is that if Calgary makes the playoffs and they end up passing Winnipeg for the final wild card spot, they either end up playing Vegas or one of Minnesota, Dallas, or potentially Colorado because the race over there is pretty tight. Um, to me personally, seeing how they played against Dallas last year in the playoffs, Dallas gave them a good run for their money. I think if Calgary were to play Dallas again, it would be kind of similar to what it was last year. Only this time, I think Dallas would, find a way to, show them probably in 6 games, I would say, or in 5 games if that was a series that would be played. Colorado would absolutely school them, and same thing with Minnesota. I don't think Calgary has the goaltending to get past a playoff series. And the reason I say that is because even if their offense picks up, and yes, they're a defensive team, I understand that. And Darryl Sutter, has always been good defensively, and I'm not going to take away from that because he's proven it. He's won 2 Stanley Cups with the system, and it's worked. I'm not saying it hasn't, but their goaltending has been awful this year, right? Statistically, they've been awful. And to me personally, in a playoff series, it doesn't matter whether you're um, eighth place or first place, your goaltending is a big reason as to why you win the Stanley Cup. It's always been, it's always going to be. You goalies find a way to steal at least one series out of the four because teams do tend to struggle sometimes, and it happens. They steal games, and I just haven't seen that from Jacob Markstrom or Dan Vladar this season to give any optimism for the Calgary Flames to be able to go and do that in the playoffs. I'm sorry, maybe Calgary Flame fans would hate me in the comments for saying that, but I think they've got a good team. I think on paper, they're a team that's supposed to be doing better than what they are. And I think that they're underachieving this season for sure. However, I'm not confident in Jacob Markstrom's ability this season. I think he's really slowed down and really uh, regressed a lot. And I'm not sure that in a 7 game series against Minnesota, Dallas, Colorado, or potentially Vegas, that he would be able to hold up. That's just my opinion. I think that Calgary is going to struggle, and I think that next year, if they do miss the playoffs, well, I think they're going to have to look at their goaltending situation first and foremost. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to firing Darryl Sutter, because as much as I believe that he hasn't really gotten the best out of his superstar players. He is a winning coach. He's proven it before. And I think, at the end of the day, sometimes players need to learn how to play in certain systems. But I think that Calgary needs to figure out their goaltending situation next year, one way or another. And I think that if they miss the playoffs or make the playoffs and get ousted in the first round, they're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not Jacob Markstrom is the guy moving forward, or whether they need to go with Dustin Wolf. Because I've been calling for Dustin Wolf to be playing since February. Since we had the win column come on, I basically suggested that Calgary should have tried him, and they didn't. And I think that they're going to slowly regret that. Although, like I said, they do have an easy schedule. So we'll see. The schedule might favor them, but that's where my concern comes in, is that they haven't really shown it against playoff teams this year. And I think that that's a big concern for Calgary. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But I think for me, their goaltending is the biggest problem. And I think that, honestly speaking, that's what's going to make the difference if they make the playoffs, and even if they don't make the playoffs.
And it's so unfortunate because Markstrom finished second in Vezina votes last year. And now you look at him and you're like, who is this guy?
Yeah,
It's
he
night and
regrets.
day, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And for me, like key factors that I would like to throw in here is essentially, Calgary's depth. It's not the worst thing ever.
Well, they
They
just
have
signed
big,
Matt Coronado, so that's going to help them a bit.
yeah, and hopefully he could get some games in too. And, hopefully Darryl Sutter is not stubborn and says, he's not going to get any games, because I think that would be a missed opportunity. And
Yeah.
we saw his treatment with Pelletier, and I really, really did not like how he handled it. I think
No.
Pelletier should be in their top six. And maybe it's a guy that, should be paired up with a guy like Jonathan Huberdeau to kind of like, get him back into the groove, essentially. And I think Pelletier has a lot of potential, and he's a piece that I think would be very interesting to see come playoff time. If Calgary gets very desperate and they insert him in the lineup, maybe he could work some wonders. Another guy that's been making a lot of noise recently and helping the Calgary Flames win the last couple of games, Walker Duehr. He's been a good addition in the
Yeah.
bottom six as well. And yeah, I would definitely give Dustin Wolf a chance if the Calgary Flames do get desperate. And I think, when it comes to, push and shove, essentially, and, there's a chance that you may not make the playoffs, there's a chance you might get eliminated in the playoffs. You're going to be looking towards some players that have a lot of potential that you may not necessarily always hope to be the guys that are going to get you out of that situation, but they have the potential to surprise people. So, guys, we'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Will the Calgary Flames make or miss the playoffs? Make sure to like this video, comment in our comment section below. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for watching.